care, when they saw him deteriorating, when they saw him drawing into himself, when they saw him disappearing into his room, what did they do? They spent their time in their own worlds, on drugs, buying guns, and splitting up and coming back together and splitting up and changing how we look at it, giving material. These situations they're citing to happened when he was 11, 12, and 13. And everyone that has dealt with any child knows that 11, 12, and 13, they don't have any good sense, especially boys, when they're coming into that age range. Anything that we can't say that from this day forward, they will never be right again. Because the law gives us some room to have that discretion. The law tells us we have to consider these factors of immaturity, vulnerability, and the potential of redemption with him, not threatening him. We've heard about from Miss Gross again, the defects cases where his mother had abused him, and his mother got drunk around him, or high, or whatever drug or choice she had at the time. And now,
before we step into today's courtroom, understand that this is not a simple sentencing hearing. What you're about to hear is one of the defense's most emotional and legally significant arguments. One that asks the court to answer a difficult question. Can a child who committed an unimaginable crime still be capable of redemption? Rather than denying the horrific consequences of the offense, the defense focuses on everything that allegedly happened long before the crime itself. They argue that years of instability, neglect, untreated mental health struggles, and a complete lack of parental guidance shaped the teenager standing before the judge today. Throughout this hearing, you'll hear references to juvenile sentencing principles, psychological evaluations, and the legal requirement that courts consider whether a young offender is permanently beyond rehabilitation or whether there remains genuine hope for change. Pay close attention because this isn't simply an emotional plea. It is a carefully structured legal argument built around Supreme Court precedent governing juvenile offenders. You'll also notice that the defense openly acknowledges the suffering of the victims while simultaneously asking the court not to define the defendant solely by the worst day of his life. Whether you agree or disagree, this is the kind of courtroom argument that sparks passionate debate across the legal community and among the public. As you watch, ask yourself one question. Should a person's childhood circumstances influence how they're sentenced for a devastating crime, or does the severity of the offense outweigh everything else? Stay with us because the defense is about to lay out every reason they believe this young defendant deserves the possibility of parole instead of spending the rest of his life behind bars.
Thank you, Judge. There's a reason that our legal system treats children differently. And Mr. Smith has just talked about it as part of his closing. They are immature. They're not fully developed. The characters can be changed, molded, and mangled by whatever force grabs onto them when it's not filled with the proper things. Colt Gray's life was not filled with the proper things. His parents didn't give him any stability. His parents didn't give him any of his needs. His parents didn't give him proper medical care. And most importantly, they did not give him proper psychological and mental health care. When they saw him deteriorating, when they saw him drawing into himself, when they saw him disappearing into his room, what did they do? They spent their time in their own worlds, on drugs, buying guns, and splitting up and coming back together and splitting up and changing schools and giving absolutely no stability. Children, in the best of circumstances, need stability. Children that have special needs, by nature, need even more stability, more predictability, not less. Colt got less. Colt had issues that his grandmother was willing or able to identify when he was young that the parents didn't do anything about. Colt got less stability than he needed, which made him even more vulnerable. As we look at how we sentence somebody, and we're not taking the position that he didn't do something wrong and heinous and horrible, that has to be admitted, and he's admitted that. And he's come forward today. He could have had a trial, but he didn't. He spared the community the trial by stepping up to do a plea to admit his guilt. He admitted his guilt that day. on 2 occasions. Now, there may be some conversation as to whether it was every fact that he put in those interviews was honest fact or not honest fact, or changed or manipulated. He was traumatized before he did the shooting, traumatized
At
by
this
his own
stage,
act.
the defense is making an important distinction that often appears in juvenile sentencing hearings. They're not arguing that the crime didn't happen, nor are they asking the court to ignore its devastating consequences. Instead, they're asking the judge to consider the defendant's mental state, developmental maturity, and personal history at the time of the offense. Notice how the attorney repeatedly returns to trauma and psychological development rather than focusing solely on the events of the crime itself. Legally, that's significant because sentencing for juveniles often requires courts to evaluate whether the offender's actions were influenced by immaturity, emotional instability, or circumstances that may change over time. It's a difficult balancing act between accountability and rehabilitation. What do you think? Should childhood trauma significantly affect sentencing decisions, or should the focus remain entirely on the harm caused?
Traumatized by his own actions, and the trauma continued after the shooting when he finally realized what he did. Yes, he had some bits of clarity, but that is driven not by evil intent, but by a desire to be accepted. And that has been the whole drive of what he's done in the TCC community. If we look at Dr. Richards' report, on his recommendation, the factors that we need to consider, which come out of Noah versus Alabama, on how we sentence children who have done bad things, we have to look at his maturity level. These situations that they're citing to happened when he was 11, 12, and 13. And everyone that has dealt with any child knows they're 11, 12, and 13. They don't have any good sense, especially boys, when they're coming into that age range. Anything that's a risk is something that's worth doing. But when you're left isolated, when you're left with no moral grounding, when you're left with no proper parental figure, you search for it somewhere else. You search for a model, you search for a hero, you search for a community that is accepting to you. That's where the vulnerability part comes in. He jumped onto a community that he could get accepted in and started reflecting, they call it mimicking. He's reflecting the behaviors of the people he's reading online. It's not that he's mimicking shooters. He's reflecting the behaviors of the community that seems to be willing to accept him, but his own parents won't. Or his own parents won't even give him the minimum that he needs to think of himself as being worthy. Yeah, he may not have been hearing the voices, but certainly he had and reflected ideations of wanting to end himself, but not. A level of self-hate that I can't begin to imagine. But that is the world that he was trying to cure by filling in with the world of the TCC and reflecting the same kinds of things that they were talking about. Well, I understand
this portion of the argument shifts from explaining why the defendant struggled to arguing whether those struggles can be overcome. The defense paints a picture of someone desperately searching for acceptance and belonging after allegedly receiving little stability at home. That doesn't excuse criminal conduct, but it is intended to explain the path that led here. You'll also notice how the attorney carefully separates explanation from justification, a distinction courts frequently emphasize. Judges are often asked to determine whether difficult life circumstances merely provide context or whether they genuinely reduce moral culpability. This is one of the most emotionally charged aspects of juvenile sentencing because both realities can exist at the same time. Profound suffering experienced by the victims and profound dysfunction in the offender's upbringing. Where do you draw that line?
Well, I understand that the victims have lost a great deal in this. Colt has not really lost because he didn't have. He didn't have those supports in his family, and he didn't have the help that he needed. His parents were obviously totally abject failures. But when we're looking again at somebody who was 11, 12, and 13 when they were trying to fill a hole, we can't say that from this day forward they will never be right again, because the law gives us some room to have that discretion. The law tells us we have to consider these factors of immaturity, vulnerability, and the potential of redemption, sometimes referred to in the law as incorrigibility. He is not irretrievably broken. That's been demonstrated by what he has done in DJJ. That's been demonstrated by the conversations and the development we've heard from both Ms. Gross and from Ms. Bohemus as to how he has changed when he finally got what he needed, which nobody had given him until this event. The idea of Easter eggs, you would have to assume a level of maturity of a 12 or 13-year-old to be able to plan that out and to think that through. And we also need to look at the dynamic of Marcy and Cole in those conversations. Because a few months before that, Marcy had threatened to kill him. And now he's having a conversation where his mother is actually engaging with him, not threatening him. We've heard about from Miss Gross again, the defects cases where his mother had abused him, and his mother got drunk around him, or high, or whatever drug of choice she had at the time. And now she's in a conversation with her where she's laughing with him.
Now the defense turns to one of the most disputed areas of the case, interpreting conversations and behavior leading up to the offense. Rather than portraying every interaction as evidence of planning or malicious intent, the attorney argues that many of these exchanges reflected emotional dependency and an unhealthy family dynamic. This is a strategic effort to challenge how the prosecution interprets intent and maturity. In sentencing, context matters because judges often examine not only what happened but why it happened and whether those motivations reveal someone capable of future rehabilitation. These competing interpretations frequently become the heart of a sentencing hearing, leaving the court to weigh psychological evidence against the undeniable consequences of the crime.
It's not him encouraging her to do something bad. It's trying to hang on to something that he didn't have without these horrible events. Judge, this is a hard decision because so many folks have been injured in ways that are indescribable. We've heard them, the families, testify to the impact on their lives. But that impact does not overweigh the court's responsibility to look at the factors in Miller and to understand that Colt was at an extremely vulnerable time in his life when he didn't get what he needed at a very young age. And that certainly doesn't mean that once we give him what he needs now going forward, he can't be made a productive member of society. The minimum that we understand, Judge, is life with parole. He will be given a life sentence. With parole, it gives him an opportunity of hope. Hope is an important factor in somebody becoming a different person than when they start. And if we give him life without parole, then that takes away the hope and that takes away the ability for him to change. With the help of the psychotropic drugs, with the counseling sessions, with the routine, with new structure and hope.
Listen carefully to what the defense is requesting now. They're not asking for immediate freedom or a reduced sentence. Instead, they're asking for a life sentence with the possibility of parole, arguing that parole simply allows future review after many years rather than guaranteeing release. That's an important legal distinction. A parole-eligible sentence still carries severe punishment, but it preserves the possibility that rehabilitation, demonstrated over decades, could someday be recognized. The defense argues that hope itself is an essential part of rehabilitation, while opponents often argue that some crimes are so serious they warrant permanent incarceration regardless of age. This philosophical divide has shaped juvenile sentencing debates across the country for years. Do you believe every juvenile offender should at least have the opportunity for parole? Or are there crimes where life without parole is justified despite the offender's age?
He can ultimately be a person who contributes to the society at some point. Life without parole, Judge, I personally think as a policy matter is too harsh for any teenager. But I understand the law doesn't look at it that way. The law gives the court the discretion. The law gives the state the chance to prove that he is not redeemable. I don't think they proved that. They proved that what he did was very bad. They proved that what he did had some planning to it. But to the degree that he is such a twisted individual that he cannot be improved, I don't buy that. I don't think they proved that. I think what we have shown is that he can improve with the right help. And we're asking this court to sentence him to the minimum, one count of life with parole.
Thank you.
With the defense concluding its remarks, the central issue before the court is now unmistakably clear. The attorney has acknowledged the gravity of the offense while urging the judge to view the defendant through the legal framework applied to juvenile offenders, considering youth, immaturity, trauma, psychological development, family environment, and the potential for rehabilitation. Rather than arguing innocence, the defense asks the court to impose the minimum sentence permitted under the law that still includes the possibility of parole, emphasizing that accountability and hope can coexist. Ultimately, the judge's decision will depend on balancing the profound impact on the victims with the legal requirement to evaluate whether this young offender is capable of meaningful change over time. Cases like this continue to generate intense legal and public debate because they force courts to weigh justice, public safety, punishment, and rehabilitation all at once. If you found this case as shocking as we did, make sure to hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more jaw-dropping courtroom breakdowns. We'd love to hear your perspective. Do you agree with the defense's argument? Or do you believe a different sentence would better serve justice? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next courtroom analysis.